Myself and 7 of my equally bored friends decided, let's play in a Metronome-Only Pokemon tournament, cause why not? So we did, and here's how it went. It started with the draft, which would contain 74 available Pokemon, with 7 being drafted by each team. The draft went in snake order, and my randomly selected draft pick was number 6. Preparing for the draft, I did a decent amount of research on stats and abilities, and was pretty prepared going into draft day.
With the first pick in the Metronome draft, Turtley selects Ursaluna, Normal, Ground, Hisui.
With a surprising first pick that was followed by more surprises like Infernape going third, my number 1 overall ranked Pokemon, Dragonite, was still on the board to pick number 5. However, it's just my luck that it didn't quite slip far enough and was selected with that 5th pick. This left me with a couple of options, one that would impact my draft from here on out. I could select my highest ranked offensive Mon remaining, Iron Hands, or I could go with the best defensive Pokemon in the entire tournament, Dusknoir.
With the 6th pick in the Metronome draft, Hershey selects Iron Hands, Fighting Electric, Paldea.
I decided to go offensive with my first pick and felt solid about that choice. Dusknoir went at pick number 8, so when it snaked back around to me at pick number 11, my boldest pick of the entire draft was an easy lock for me personally. The entire group was shocked to see me select Alolan Golem, but I had a plan. My next few picks were Scrafty, a very solid defensive option with a couple of immunities, as well as Intimidate as his ability, and the next were Golduck, Poliwrath, and Delphox to round out the starting 6. Finally, my benchmon would be Miltank, who I selected as a solid defensive option with the ability Scrappy, which allows them to hit ghost types with normal fighting moves. Following the draft, there were a few swaps that everyone would be allowed to make, and after a few changes, here were the final teams. The LGTV community: Ursaluna, Wigglytuff, Swalot, Jinx, Aromatisse, Hypno, and Grumpig. The feminists: Iron Valiant, Screamtail, Gardevoir, Poliwrath, Tinkaton, Grimmsnarl, and Sableye. Monkey business: Infernape, Monkey Dory, Ambipom, Grafaiai, Primeape, Mr. Rhyme, and Mr. Mime. The Anaheim Annihilapes: Annihilape, Togekiss, Inteleon, Florges, Weavile, Slacking, and Alakazam. The Tatsumaki Gods: Dragonite, Lucario, Electivire, Slurpuff, Snorlax, Magmortar, and Pawmot. The Chonky Mons: Galarian Slowbro, Galarian Slowking, Machamp, Hatterene, Alolan Muck, Arboliva, and Indeedee. The Laboratory Goons: Dusknoir, Azumarill, Slowbro, Slowking, Ludicolo, Toxtricity, and Banette. And finally, my final team: Iron Giant, the Iron Hands, Regional Clyde, the Alolan Golem, Roderick the Scrafty, Frogger the Politoed, who was swapped in for Poliwrath, Alex Russo the Delphox, Affleck the Golduck, and finally D the Miltank. Say hello to High Voltage. The structure of the tournament started with a round-robin regular season, where each team would face each other once in order to set the seeds for the bracket. My season started against what I felt was the best team, the Tatsumaki Gods. After a couple of test battles, I decided to go into the fight with D on the team in place of Affleck, and she would be my lead Pokemon. The battle begun just as you'd expect, with some stat and terrain changes, and all was going well until D was poisoned by Barb Barrage. Status moves like Poisoning and Burns are brutal in this format, as there's essentially no way to clear them, and they're guaranteed to damage them on every round, which is something that can't necessarily be said for a lot of the moves that Metronome can select. At this point, D's clock was winding down, and all I could hope for was some damage on her way out. And after surviving poison on 1 HP, she dealt one final hit to Magmortar. Next out was Regional Clyde, and now is a good time as any to explain my reasoning for selecting this seemingly vulnerable Pokemon. Along with bringing strong physical stats, Alolan Golem also brings a very interesting hidden ability called Galvanize. This ability turns any normal type move into a boosted stab electric move. Metronome can select any move in the entire library of Pokemon with an upwards of 600 damage-dealing moves. It's hard to predict which type may show up. But out of the 18 overall types, Normal is by far the most common option, making up nearly 1/6 of all damaging moves, and about 3/4 of those are physical. This means that Galvanize gives Clyde a boost from 16 physical stab moves to 86 physical stab moves. However, Clyde's first appearance didn't really go as planned. After using a resisted Bullet Punch, he was hit by a super effective Seed Bomb, followed by a critical hit Iron Head. Another resisted Grasp move led to the 30% burn chance of Magmortar's Flame Body. This would be our second consecutive mon to get hit with a status and would slowly eat away at health, once again. Magmortar would continue to set up before a clutch Infestation from Clyde, who would somehow outlast Magmortar before Slurpuff took the KO. Frogger swapped in to help take down Slurpuff, and after a few turns got a lucky water move use against it, proccing its water absorbability. After a couple of moves and stat changes, I made the hard swap to Iron Giant. Unfortunately, Recover brought Slurpuff all the way back into the green with now boosted attack, defense, and speed stats. We eventually landed Teeter Dance, confusing Slurpuff and immediately causing a self-damaging hit to our opponent, and Slurpuff continued to boost just about every stat imaginable when it hit itself in confusion for the second time, knocking itself out and evening the battle 4 mons each. But we'd yet to see the biggest members of the Tatsumaki gods. Lucario was next out, who swapped into an immunity to Gunk Shot, and then Venoshock, the unluckiest of rolls for Iron Giant right out the gate. A few turns later, Whirlwind was used and drug out one of the big guns for our opponent, Dragonite. A super effective Headlong Rush knocked out Iron Giant, putting us behind the 8 ball. A Gigaton Hammer by Lucario nearly one-shot Alex Russo, and our downward spiral was solidly in action. To avoid a Future Sight hit on Alex, Roderick came in with immunity. After multiple weak and missed moves, an Aeroblast obliterated our Scrafty and left us with just a little more than one Pokemon, which would fall to 1 Mon after a Misty Explosion from Alex Russo, our first self-kill of the season. A 3-1 comeback just wasn't in the cards for Frogger, and we fell to the Tatsumaki gods 3-0. Coming off of that disappointing loss, my next opponent was the aptly named Feminists, who consisted of mostly Fairy and Psychic types. The assumption was that this team was probably second or third best on paper, so it'd be an uphill battle to get back to 500. I once again led with D, who would face his lead Sableye, a mon that flaunts 3 immunities, but that's paired with being pretty weak in most stats. An immediate miss by D to start the match was followed by her setting up Rain Dance. Poliwrath was swapped in by my opponent to try and take advantage of this before being hit with Torment. Per our tournament rules, Torment requires a swap out since Metronome is the only learned move by each Pokemon, but my opponent forgot the rules and used Struggle a couple of times, getting guaranteed damage before we both swapped out. Sableye was brought back out to face Iron Giant. A Stab Zap Cannon from Iron Giant left Sableye paralyzed, which now gave us the speed advantage. The following turn, he landed a crit Aqua Step, knocking out Sableye and handing us the early advantage. Gardevoir was next out, who set up Rain Dance, which prompted me to send out Frogger. After a few turns, Frogger landed a clutch, super effective Poltergeist, which KO'd Gardevoir. This would lead to the Battle of the Polys. If you recall my draft class, Poliwrath was originally drafted by my team, and after Politoed was dropped by his drafting team, I swapped him onto my team in exchange for letting go of Poliwrath. Seething with anger and green with envy, Poliwrath was looking for revenge on his replacement, and looked to bring his team back into the match, as my team had a 6-4 advantage. But instead he healed Frogger with a water move before being knocked out almost immediately by Horndrill. Kids, don't hold grudges. It just won't end well. At a 3-mon disadvantage, my opponent sent out his number 1 draft pick, Iron Valiant. After a couple of hits, I hard swapped to Roderick to lower Iron Valiant's attack with Intimidate. He was unfortunately hit with a crit Hydro Cannon, bringing him down to about half health. A clutch Fire Spin, however, allowed Iron Valiant to be taken down somewhat quickly, and Roderick lived to tell the tale. After our 4th knockout, I was starting to get pretty confident about winning this match. Wanting to preserve Roderick's life, I swapped in Clyde to face Screamtail, After several turns of resisted hits, a Mega Punch brought Stream Tail down to the yellow, a Thunder Punch to red, and Power Whip would finish it off. We had yet to lose a Pokemon as Tinkaton was sent in. Clyde would remain in and tank a crit Blood Moon, and a Minimize would cause a missed Temper Flare before Milk Drink would bring High Voltage's mascot back into the green. After using No Retreat, just about every stat had been boosted, and Regional Clyde was morphing into Confident Clyde right before our eyes. And just a few turns later, he would take down Tinkaton with Supercell Slam, granting us a staggering 6-0 victory over one of the best teams in the tournament. This was a tremendous confidence boost for the team. Scoring the only 6-0 sweep of the entire tournament this early gave High Voltage a ton of momentum moving forward. Match 3 would take place against the LGTV community. Once more, I led with D, and he sent out Aromatisse first. Double Edge would bring both Mons down to around half health before I swapped in Alex Russo to take advantage of the harsh sunlight. A Roar of Time that would have KO'd just about any Pokemon in the tournament sadly doesn't affect fairy types, but Alex was eventually able to take out Aromatisse with a Psychic regardless. A hard read allowed Roderick to intimidate Ursaluna, the number 1 overall pick in the draft, and one of the best offensive Pokemon. Unfortunately, a burn on turn 1 of this matchup would mean Roderick only had a few turns before the status would end him for the match. With Swallow being swapped in, I made a change of my own, bringing in Clyde. Ursaluna was quickly brought back out and was hit by the Oko move, Guillotine, which, for some reason, had no effect on the normal ground beast. This was a confusing moment, and really a huge turning point in this match. Instead of a KO to the squad's best Pokemon, we dealt no damage, and no one is sure why. After Dive was used by Ursaluna, I swapped into Politoed, who wouldn't be affected, and a few turns later, I decided to bring out the burned Roderick for the attack drop, which also allowed us to avoid a Future Sight attack. Frogger rejoined the fight and finally took down Ursaluna, but not after a significant chunk of health was gone. Our team, while still fully intact, was pretty beat up as Hypno entered. A crit Volt Tackle and a strong Draco Meteor brought Hypno down to half health before we lost Frogger, which prompted Clyde to come back out. High Horsepower, however, did a massive number on Clyde, and I decided it wasn't worth losing him just yet, so Alex was sent back onto the field. She missed a bounce as Hypno ingrained, which was followed by yet another miss, this time of Magma Storm. Things were not looking too hot as Hypno continued to set up and a super effective Meteor Beam would take down Alex Russo. With the entire rest of the team hanging on by a thread, Iron Giant made his first appearance and finally took down Hypno with Rock Wrecker. A useless Tailwind led to a strong Fire Punch that brought Jinx down under 10% health. However, a Swords Dance, String Shot, and Glaciate still left Jinx alive to bring Iron Giant's health down to yellow. On the surface, the situation looks great for us, but every mon on our team was under half health, while our opponents were nearly full. Swallow was sent out and they used Future Sight. I swapped into D, and while I could have swapped into the immune Roderick, he was under 10 health, and I was afraid he would not live whatever attack Swallow might use before the Future Sight attack took effect. D would faint the following turn as Clyde was swapped back in. Several turns of trading weak moves was followed by a strong Electro Shot. A few turns later, Baton Pass forced a switch into Iron Giant, who was able to take down Swallow with a Blast Burn. But the opposing Wigglytuff came out at full health against our 3 extremely weak remaining members. It was able to take down Iron Giant, Roderick, and finally Clyde to hit us with our second loss of the season. This one was brutal, especially with the confusion around Guillotine not hitting Ursaluna. Other Oko moves were landed, though no one really knows why this normal type move didn't work, but had it hit like it should have, that's a very different match. Nonetheless, we carry a 1-2 record into our 4th match. Our opponent was the Laboratory Goons, who were ranked as the worst team coming out of the draft. I switched up my strategy a bit, leading with Frogger this time around, as the Goons set out Banette. A Dragon Tail forced Dusk Noir into the battle. Things started out really well after Frogger's turn 1 Ingrain continued to keep him near full health, followed by a Hone Claws to raise his attack. A Sleep Powder from Dusk Noir luckily missed, which was followed by a Headlong Rush that took away nearly half of the bulky Ghost's HP. Back-to-back normal moves couldn't hit, but a ridiculous amount of stat changes plus Ingrain continued to stall this matchup. A super effective Leaf Storm did a number on Frogger, but the return Sky Attack finally killed off the best defensive Pokemon in the tournament. Next was Azumarill. And I would try and do play-by-play of this sequence, but just look at this ridiculousness. This absolute beast of a frog turned into an impenetrable wall for our opponent. Frogger had somehow defeated the opponent's 2 best Pokemon single-handedly. Unfortunately, this insane run would end with Slowking's first attack, but it was a truly amazing performance from Frogger in his first battle leading. Ingrain lasted 21 turns, which is something I don't think anyone expected to see. With the legend finally defeated, Dee was sent out, and she missed a Horn Drill and was immediately whirlwind out for Alex Russo. Slowking figured he'd try the Ingrain strategy that worked so well for Frogger, but then promptly used Self-Destruct to give us a 5-3 advantage. Ludicolo entered with a super effective Mighty Cleave, but a later critical hit Electro Shot from Alex brought them down into the red before a final Gambit marked yet another self-kill. Looking to preserve Alex, I swapped an Iron Giant to face Banette. A strong Heat Crash dealt a huge amount of damage before Psyblade would finish off the Benadryl Demon. Finally, the last Pokemon for the Goons saw the field, and Toxtricity had a ton of work to do if they wanted to pull off a win. Wanting to finish off a 5-0W, I swapped in Roderick for the first time in the fight. But after a few turns, he'd fallen below half health as well. And you know what that means. It's time for Regional Clyde to finish the job. And that he did. A first turn Bleakwind Storm and a second turn Blue Flare made quick work of the Poison Electric Lizard, and we'd claim our second win of the season after 44 turns of battle, half of which Frogger dominated. A polarizing set of results, we entered our next match against the Chunky Mons as a 2-2 team, but with 6-0 and 5-0 wins paired with a 1-0 loss. High Voltage was just starting to get the ball rolling. After the Hall of Fame-worthy performance Frogger put in his last match, I couldn't bring myself to not lead with him again. He'd be tasked with facing Galarian's slow... or not. A Whirlwind swiftly drug out Iron Giant. My opponent hard-swapped Arboliva into a Yawn and failed a Thunderclap before getting swapped right back out for Galarian Slowking, who was promptly hit with a super effective Jaw Lock. After a few turns, Iron Giant claimed the KO with triple arrows. Arboliva re-entered the fight and hit us with a block, meaning this was now Iron Giant's fight. Slowbro came back out to take advantage of a wish, and he would eventually take down the Giant, but not before a strong head smash. D was brought in to take down okay. Apparently Slowbro just really doesn't like my decisions. A crit Electroshock from Alex Russo was a bit overkill for the 5% health Slowbro had remaining, but regardless it gave us a 6-5 lead. Alola Mux was next, and, well, apparently the Chonky Mons walked to the beat of their own drum. Not sure Misty Explosion was the move to make there, but it brought out Hatterene. The bulky Fairy type was chipping away at Alex when her 3-time special attack was swapped. A strong Electro Ball would bring Alex dangerously low, but a crit Fiery Dance knocked out Hatterene. This team is just so clutch. Machamp was brought out, which led me to switch into Roderick to lower his attack with Intimidate. Unfortunately, a final Gambit on turn 1 for Roderick left us down another Mon, but left Machamp with just a quarter health. Frogger came back in for the first time since the turn 1 Whirlwind, and made quick work of Machamp. Arboliva hit the field for the 3rd time in the match, and I sent out D, who was equipped with Sap Zipper. I made a poor switch to Alex Russo, hoping for the grassy terrain to heal her, but even a resisted leafage was enough to take her out before that could take effect. A Flying Press did massive damage, and after way too many turns of stalling and healing, D finally took the KO and claimed our 3rd win of the season, putting us over 500 for the first time. Starting our penultimate battle of the regular season, Frogger was once again tasked with taking the lead. Our opponent was the Anaheim Annihilapes, who led with the Fairy-type Florges. A second turn Memento gave us an early lead, as a Flower Trick from Alakazam did a solid amount of damage. And unfortunately, Belly Drum put Frogger within KO distance. Alex Russo was next up, who whittled the opponent down to the yellow before Roost would fill him right back up. A resisted Psycho Boost somehow did over half health, and Alex returned the favor with a Fire Blast. A strong Dire Claw brought Alakazam down to red and landed Poison, knocking him out at the end of the turn. As Inteleon came in, I swapped to D, who was hurt badly by a snipe shot. Volt Tackle and Superpower returned the damage, leaving Inteleon barely alive as D was killed by Draco Meteor. Iron Giant came in to finish off Inteleon, and Togekiss was next out. We'd get trapped in Sand Tomb, which is for some reason insanely strong, and Iron Giant just couldn't take it any longer, using Memento and fainting. As Roderick forced Togekiss's attack even lower, that caused a switch into Annihilate, who would immediately proc an immunity to Hyper Voice. Volt Switch would then bring out Clyde. The two traded blows until yet another immunity for Annihilate, followed by Recover, would put us squarely behind. But as Clyde always does, he clutched a Magma Storm that would chip away at health. I forgot about Defiant, and so my swap to Roderick backfired, gifting Annihilate an attack boost. A couple of blows later, and yet another immunity, Annihilate would take Roderick out with Slam. Alex would come in and hit a Lumina Crash, which kept some hope alive for the team. A strong Super Fang led into another immunity, this time for Togekiss. Horrible luck. Glaive Rush and a Galvanized Tackle swapped heavy damage, which spelled bad things for us. But it wasn't over yet, as Clyde landed a KO with Aqua Tail. Unfortunately, Togekiss immediately used a super effective Petal Dance, ending what had to have been the most frustrating match of the entire season. A 1-0 loss evened our overall record to 3-3 as we entered the final game before the tournament. Monkey Business was our final opponent, and the team had their fair share of struggles despite being a strong team on paper. It was an extremely quick start, as after just 4 turns, Frogger went down with Final Gambit that left Grafaiai with just 5% health. I decided to send in Roderick to drop the max attack stat they'd gained with Belly Drum. Sadly, he was hit with an extremely strong Facade that nearly one-shot our best defensive Mon. He did, however, return a Hydro Pump that would knock out Grafaiai and bring in Ambipom. Wanting to preserve Intimidate, I swapped into Iron Giant. A Petal Dance caused him to be stuck in battle and become confused after 3 turns when Monkey Dory hit the field for the first time. I swapped into D, who was Dragon-tailed out in favor of Roderick, and a Misty Explosion would mark another self-kill, our 4th of the season. D would come back out and become the first victim of Monkey Dory's Toxic Chain, possibly the most broken ability in the tournament. But she would make sure that she was the last to get hit with the chain, as she landed Fissure, the Oko move, on the very next turn. A couple of turns later, D succumbed to the Toxic, and Alex Russo was sent in to finish up Ambipom. An Aerial Ace did the job, and we get our first look at Mr. Rhyme. A couple of turns of weak moves ended up dragging out Iron Giant, who would use a super effective Bite before Mr. Rhyme teleported out. A Stab Thunderbolt on Primeape did a solid number before Sure Up refilled him right back up to max HP. One final Power Whip was enough to take down Iron Giant and leave us with a 2-3 disadvantage. It was Clyde time, and, well, alright then. Primeape used a resisted explosion to even it back up. A strong bounce knocked out Mr. Rhyme, and suddenly this was our game to lose, and yet another self-kill from Monkey Business would wrap it up. I guess Clyde was just too intimidating for any of those monkeys to face. This was actually the 3rd time in 5 matches that Infernape had a self-kill. Does someone want to, check on him, make sure he's doing alright? With our 7th and final match wrapped up, it was time to prepare for the main bracket. Based on our record and tiebreakers, we actually ended up as the number 2 overall seed, only behind the 6-1 Tatsumaki Gods. Our 4-3 record brought us into a 4-way tie for 2nd, but after head-to-head matches all canceled each other out, it was left up to the Pokemon differential. This was something we had set up at the beginning of the season to make sure we didn't have any ties that couldn't be broken. And the way it works, for example, is after a 2-0 victory and a 1-0 loss, you'd have a differential of +1. With our team having the largest blowout wins of the season, the only 6-0 win, and one of only 2 5-0 wins, we ended up with a differential of +11. For reference, only 2 other teams were even in the positives, the 6-1 Tatsumaki Gods at +15, and the Chonky Mons, who were all the way down at +2. It was clear that High Voltage had the ability to be dominant, and that's what we would try and prove in the tournament. Taking a look at the overall bracket, the Tatsumaki Gods, the number 1 seed, would face the shocking number 8 seed Monkey Business. The 4 and 5 seeds were the Chonky Mons and the Anaheim Annihilates, and on our side of the bracket, the 3 seed was the Feminists facing the 6 seed LGTV Community, and finally, we would face off against the number 7 seeded Laboratory Goons. We defeated the Goons 5-0 in the regular season, so I was confident that High Voltage could win this match. But, of course, with Metronome, you just never know what may happen. Frogger would continue to be our lead as Toxtricity would come out first for the Goons. Just 4 turns saw Frogger go down to multiple super effective stab electric moves. Roderick was next up and saw a swap into Azumarill. Howl boosted Roderick's attack stat, followed by a swap of abilities, giving Roderick now doubled attack, plus the Howl boost. Another swap allowed Roderick to now outspeed Azumarill, who was brought under 40% health. A missed gunk shot was followed by a cross poison to take down Azumarill, evening up the match. Torment would force Ludicolo out for Dusk Noir, who was promptly put to sleep and swapped back out for Ludicolo. Swords Dance would continue to raise Roderick's attack, now over 1100 base attack. Thrash would leave Roderick with just a shred of health when the significantly boosted Rock Blast would knock out Ludicolo. Yet another Swords Dance would raise Roderick's attack to just a ridiculous 1638 base attack. This is what Metronome is made for. Sadly, he was knocked out on the next turn, but man, is that the highest attack stat you've ever seen? D came out to face Toxtricity, who was quickly wiped out. As we had fallen behind 4-3, it was time to send out Iron Giant. But a wish would refill Toxtricity's health as Iron Giant slowly whittled down. An extremely clutch recover allowed Iron Giant to live through an Aura Sphere and deliver a head smash and headlong rush to finally defeat Meth. As the sleeping Dusk Noir came back in, I decided to take the free switch to Clyde. As the opponent woke up on the next turn, Clyde set up a wish that would refill his health on the next turn. Supercell Slam, Stone Edge, and Sacred Fire would leave Dusk Noir burned and with just a few HP, which would disappear the next turn to give us the 3-2 lead. Clyde continued in the battle, and a Lunar Blessing allowed him to survive a super effective Brine from Slowking. He used Healing Wish, and while unfortunately it did end Clyde for the match, that allowed us to heal Iron Giant, who was under half health at the time. Imprison forced both of us to swap, bringing out Alex Russo for me and Banet for the Goons. A Thunderbolt into an extremely strong Psyshock would easily take out Banet. This would leave only Slowking between High Voltage and a trip to the semifinals. A super effective Shadow Claw and Volt Switch left Slowking below 20% health as Iron Giant came in to finish the job with X Scissor. And with that, we move on to the semifinals to face the Feminists. On the other side of the bracket, a shocking upset of the nearly undefeated Tatsumaki Gods left Monkey Business to face the Chonky Mons. While we did beat the Feminists 6-0 in our first matchup, this team is no slouch, which is shown by their rebound to claim the number 3 seed. For the first time since match 3 of the regular season, I decided to lead with D. He sent out Poliwrath, whose MV seems to have faded away, although he still looks quite angry. An early gunk shot poisoned the water fighting type and got us off to a great start. A tail slap hit all 5 times, bringing Poliwrath down to 1 HP, which was cleaned up by the poison. That brought in Tinkaton, who avoided a guillotine. A critical hit boost made this mon very dangerous, taking out D with a crit Flare Blitz. A swap to Alex to take advantage of Harsh Sunlight worked out perfectly with a boosted, super effective stab Lava Plume to take down Tinkaton and kept our lead even at 1 Pokemon. Grimmsnarl, who was swapped onto the team in favor of Sableye, got their first look at the field. A strong Rock Blast did a decent chunk of damage to Alex before a super effective Moon Blast brought Grimmsnarl into the red. Sandtomb finished the job, marking the second KO for Alex. Gardevoir came in to finish off the Fox, which prompted Frogger to make his first appearance. A horribly timed Lunar Dance killed off Frogger though on his first turn and evened up the match at 3 Mons apiece. A strong Bullet Seed from Iron Giant brought Gardevoir down to yellow, while Frenzy Plant returned the favor. I decided to make a hard swap to Roderick, who continued to lower the opponent's stats. After an immunity to mystical power, Roderick finally took out Gardevoir with a super effective Shadow Punch. The match remained extremely close, with both teams at approximately the same amount of health. With Iron Valiant set out, Roderick continued and hit a strong Psybeam before the King of Stats began to set up again. A growl followed by Hone Claws led into a Shockwave. Hanging on in the red, a resisted Rock Wrecker evened up the health deficit before Roderick would finally fall to a Poison Fang. Our two strongest Mons remained, with a spot in the championship on the line. Frogger's Lunar Dance finally paid off as it fully healed Iron Giant upon switch-in. While he did lose about half of that health before taking down Iron Valiant, things were looking pretty good. Screamtail entered as the final hope for the Feminists. A few turns later, a critical hit Crush Claw put the win within sight, and this Leaf Blade is what did it. With that, High Voltage had won the right side of the bracket, and we would face the number 4 seeded Chonky Mons in the championship. The championship was upon us, and I decided to go back to Frogger as our lead. A strong Brick Break from a champ hurt us early, but Frogger returned a super effective Psybeam. They traded blows until a Razor Shell procced Water Absorb, giving us an advantage on health early. But the following turn, a Bolt Strike immediately wiped away that lead as Frogger went down. Machamp fell to 11% HP with Roderick in, before a Wish regained 50% of their lost health. Cosmic Power allowed Roderick to set up as the King of Stats was once again back at it, along with an Aqua Ring to slow the heal. This prompted a switch into Alolan Muck, as the combo of Supercell Slam and Dragon Rush quickly brought them down to the yellow. An immunity to Psybeam allowed Muck to use Haze, which unfortunately reset all the stat changes we'd set up. And on top of that, Poison Touch was activated, causing Roderick to now be losing health each round rather than gaining with Aqua Ring. Machamp swapped back in on a Flash Cannon and Blood Moon, bringing him down to the yellow for the second time. Wrap and Eerie Spell would finish off Machamp and bring the fight closer to even. Muck set up an annoying Stealth Rocks as Volt Tackle took them out, giving us the sudden 5-4 advantage. Just as Roderick was about to succumb to the poison, an Ice Punch from Galarian Slowbro did the job instead. The fight was all even with D coming in. After a few turns, D was low on health before using a fitting Milk Drink, followed by an immunity to Nightshade and a Swords Dance. A super effective Cross Chop wasn't really what I had in mind, as that left D with a sliver of health, and Fury Cutter took her out. Glide time. A Fire Punch and Double Edge easily took down Slowbro to once again even us up at 3 Mons apiece. Next in was probably the most annoying Pokemon in the entire tournament, Arboliva. Its Seed Sower ability meant constant healing for everyone on the field, stalling out matches instantly. Even after multiple super effective moves, Arboliva remained at over 80% health, and Clyde was down to 50%. I didn't think it was worth losing him just yet, so I sent out Alex Russo. Stealth Rocks did a ridiculous 24% damage as Seed Sower was reactivated by Struggle Bug. Arboliva used U-Turn, forcing a switch to Galarian Slowking, and things just simply weren't going well. Alex had dropped all the way under 40%, while Slowking remained solidly in the green. Slowking continued to lower her stats before the eventual super effective Aqua Jet that would cause a knockout. Iron Giant entered and missed Sheer Cold, used a resisted Struggle Bug and missed a Circle Throw and Fake Out, as a critical hit Snipe Shot had this battle and our hopes for a championship looking grim. A Synthesis neared a full heal for Slowking as the bad luck piled on. A super effective Dazzling Gleam took out the Giant and left one final hope remaining. The surprise early pick that everyone snarled about. The mascot of High Voltage. We'd seen him come into his own. From the confidence, the swagger. With one final swap, it was Clyde time.